אז מה בדיוק מצבו של יקיר הערוץ ג'ורדן פיטרסון? מיד תלמדו. אבל אני רוצה לפתוח בכמה מילים אישיות לפני שנשמע את עדותה של ביתו, מיכאלה פטרסון, על מצבו של אביה, ג'ורדן פיטרסון. בישראל יש לא מעט אנשים שמתעניינים בעבודתו ועוקבים בעניין אחר דברי החוכמה שלו. יש גם קהל לא קטן שעוקב אחרי השיחות וההרצאות שלי אודותיו ועל ספריו. לכן יש ביניכם רבים שמודאגים מאוד כיום מהיעלמותו בחודשים האחרונים ומן הדיווחים המטרידים על מצבו. בסרטון שנשמע מיד מתארת מיכאלה בכנות ובכאב רב רצף ארוך וקשה של סבל נפשי וגופני שעובר על אביה בשנים האחרונות. סבל שקשור בין היתר לפגיעה נוירולוגית ולמצבים של אקטיזיה, תסמונת קשה שמלווה באי שקט גופני ונפשי קיצוני. חשוב לי להדגיש מראש, מה שנשמע כאן איננו ייעוץ רפואי, זו לא הבחנה ולא המלצה טיפולית, אלא עדות משפחתית על מסע של חולי, בלבול וייאוש, וזאת כפי שהוא נחווה מבפנים, מתוך המשפחה. אתם תחושו את הכאב בכל מבע של מיכאלה ובכל משפט שלה. בכל מקרה, תכינו ממחטות. כך או כך, כל מטרתי בהצגת השיחה הזאת עם תרגום וכתוביות בעברית היא לאפשר למי שדואגים לפטרסון להציץ במידת הצנעה האפשרית אל תוך האירוע הקיומי והמשפחתי שבתוכו הוא ובני משפחתו חיים כעת. מי שקרא או מכיר את כתביו של פטרסון יודע עד כמה הוא עצמו הציע שוב ושוב לקרוא את החיים שלנו, בעיקר את הסבל האנושי שלנו, דרך סיפורי התנ"ך. ולכן אני מציע שעלינו לקרוא את סיפורו הכואב של פיטרסון במיוחד דרך דמותו של איוב, האדם הצדיק שנשמט תחת רגליו השטיח של בריאות, משפחה ומשמעות, והוא נאלץ להתעמת עם השאלה איך מחזיקים באמונה וביושר פנימי בלב שערה קיומית שאין לה הסבר פשוט שההיגיון נגמר. כפי שתראו, גם הוא וגם מיכאלה מניחים שמצבו נגרם בשל גורם שמימי. זו לא הפיזיקה, הם אומרים, זו המטאפיזיקה. אז אני מזמין אתכם להקשיב כעת למיכאלה לא כאשת מקצוע, אלא כבת כואבת. ואל תקשיבו לה אתם כפסיכיאטרים שמבקשים להבין מה יש לו לג'ורדן פיטרסון. בואו נעשה את החסד שהיא מבקשת מאיתנו, ונקשיב לה כקהילה של אנשים תומכים ומתעניינים, שמבקשים ללמוד גם את הסיפור הזה כפרק נוסף, כואב ומטלטל, בקריאה הגדולה של ספר איוב. מה עושים כאשר אדם ומשפחה שלמה נזרקים אל תוך מסע של סבל שאין לו תשובה מהירה? מקס ובר, הסוציולוג הגדול, הסביר שכך, מתוך הצורך להצדיק את הסבל, מתפתחות דתות, מתוך בעיית התאודיציה, כפי שקרא לה, מן הבעיה של צדיק ורע לו. ואולי מתוך ההקשבה הזאת נוכל לגבש גם את עמדתנו שלנו, כבני אדם, כמאמינים או כלא מאמינים, כלפי השאלות שהסיפור של ג'ורדן פיטרסון ומשפחתו מציב בפנינו. אז שלום, אני פרופסור גד יאיר, וזה ערוץ האמת, אקדמיה, מדע ותרבות. והסדרה על ג'ורדן פיטרסון מצויה עבורכם בהערה הראשונה. אתם מוזמנים לבלות איתו שעות של חוכמה ולהפיק ממנו תבונת חיים מלאה. אז הנה, אל תשפטו בבקשה את מיכאלה. אתם מוזמנים לכתוב למטה מילות נחמה ותפילה כפי שביקשה, ואני אעביר לה את כולכם. ואנא היו טובים, בדיוק כפי שלימד אותנו ג'ורדן פיטרסון. תן לכם להיזכר בו לרגע, בפתיחה, בו ובכאב שלו, ואז נעבור לשמוע את ביתו, מיכאלה פטרסון, עם עדכון קודר ביותר.
I don't think I had any happiness at all for 3 years, pretty much.
And what
It
is...
was dire. Well, my wife, she spent a year hovering on the brink of death in a variety of different ways. Before that, my daughter had catastrophic health problems, which have mostly resolved. And then I got extremely ill. So we've been in, and at the same time, we were facing social pressure of like an unparalleled magnitude. People trying to, you know, bring this enterprise to a halt, I suppose, if that's probably the right way to think about it. Most of that time, I was hoping that I would die. I've been grateful for the good things that have happened to me, but I don't think I was grateful enough before just for mundane normality, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, you think you don't have everything you could have, and perhaps that's true, but if you can sit down and breathe, there's lots of people who don't have that.
Yeah.
Hey guys, this is a video update on Dad's health, as well as a much longer portion of information about what he's suffering from, what a lot of people are suffering from, unfortunately, and what my experience with these issues was. These updates are not fun for me. They're really stressful, and I would have updated you guys sooner, but he's still been really sick, and he got worse over the last few months, and I'm 25 weeks pregnant, and I wasn't able to record anything without weeping the whole time until this week, apparently. And it stresses out my whole family to talk about it online, and there's no point in adding stress to an already stressful situation, except that because we're public, Dad in particular, it's also stressful not talking about it because then rumors get started, and then that's all people wonder about. So, here goes. Dad's been suffering from an old neurological injury that's more recently been causing akathisia. Akathisia is the worst thing I've ever seen anyone go through. That sounds dramatic, but it's true. We talked about it in 2020 and 2021 when he experienced it after clonazepam injured him. And I'll explain why it's an injury in a bit. I had a very brief experience with akathisia with symptoms that were extremely horrifying, but not as severe as his when I went through antidepressant withdrawal from Lexapro. That was just over 10 years ago. And that experience, like the withdrawal period that was really severe, lasted 2.5 years for me, where I was nearly disabled. This was kind of before I had a public thing going on. That's when I just had a blog. I've linked a bunch of papers below about everything I'm going to talk about so that people watching can get scientific background information about what this is, because it's not talked about nearly enough for how catastrophic it is. In my opinion, psych med injuries and psych meds as a whole should be considered a national emergency, given 1 in 6 Americans, or possibly more depending on the stat, is on one of these medications, and long-term use appears to cause mitochondrial dysfunction that manifests as a neurological injury. I'll get into more of that in a bit too. Akathisia is a side effect that's way more common than people know, usually caused by psychiatric medications, although other medications can sometimes cause it, and so can sudden cessation from those medications. That's a huge trigger. So like suddenly stopping one of the medications that can also cause it. And sometimes people with Parkinson's can experience it too. It is intolerable discomfort that makes people want to crawl out of their skin. It's a neurological injury, really. A lot of people don't survive it, and there's no quick fix, although I'll go into how we've dealt with it before. Without videotaping me sobbing, and it seems like a bunch of my sadness this week has turned into anger, which is actually at least more enjoyable for me. But without posting a video of me sobbing, I don't know how to describe how bad it is in words, but I'm going to take a stab at it. You guys could look up videos of other people suffering with it if you want to. It's catastrophic. Before I get into it, let me be super clear. Dad has not been on a psych medication since January 2020. This recent flare-up of neurological symptoms wasn't due to new medications. That's partly why we had no idea what was going on for about 6 months. We went to specialists, obviously, and it was misdiagnosed repeatedly, which is super common. Then he got pneumonia and sepsis, and obviously that's a whole thing to recover from too, and dangerous, you know. This year's just been terrible. This recent flare-up that started last August was likely due to the stress of both of his parents, my grandparents, dying last year, moving countries, selling his home, and mold exposures, which was enough to trigger a recurrence of neurological symptoms, like what he experienced in 2020, 2021, something we obviously didn't think was possible after 5.5 years away from these psych medications. But I've talked to psychiatrists who say they have patients that experience this. This has been unbelievably hard on my family. Every day for the last year has been hell. I haven't been posting podcasts regularly online because until a few days ago, I've cried every single day. My brother's stressed out. My mom is stressed. I mean, it's impacting so many people. And of course, my dad, mom's, thank goodness, such a strong person, and thank God for faith. If it weren't for my dad and our love for him and the strength of our family and how we've been through so many health problems, you almost adapt. Now you don't because it's too awful, but like we have got good communication skills and we're closer, if anything, now. Otherwise, this would have just crushed us. I've certainly been walking around in a state of panic for almost a year now. Pregnancy hormones definitely don't help that. And then to make matters worse, I don't even want to mention this really because I don't want to give it any attention, but some journalist online reached out to me trying to pin dad's symptoms on stem cell treatments, which is so dumb it's hard to fathom. And I responded, which was stupid. You should just never respond to a journalist. But I was like, hey, I really appreciate you looking into doctors, but like, that's not what's going on with dad. I'm going to talk about what's going on with dad. But it just isn't associated with stem cells. And he ignored me. And anyway, that kind of thing is annoying, obviously. So dad had stem cell IVs over the years a couple times to see if they can help with neurological pins and needles and pain and like sensitivities and things. And I had mentioned in one of my videos that last summer in June, he had a stem cell IV from a specialist. This is a specialist I don't know. He was like hooked up with him from one of his friends, a great specialist, but it's not someone I'm connected to. He stayed in a moldy hotel for that treatment, and that brought back symptoms. It wasn't the stem cell IV. He's had hordes of those. And trying to link the stem cell IV in June to sepsis from pneumonia in October is insane. Anyway, sepsis happens within days of an infection. So not only are we dealing with missing my dad, pregnancy for me, taking care of him, and being really sad, but we also have to deal with morons on the internet. So that sucks. The problem this year likely was that because we didn't know stress and mold exposure, stress really too, could re-trigger old neurological injuries. It was misdiagnosed a bunch, and then medications and supplements that were used by a few of the doctors in hospitals worsened symptoms. Enough that it got to the point where we were like, oh, we know what akathisia is. Oh no. So now that we know what it is and have proper doctors, it can be carefully healed again, like it has before. And it is. So thank God for that. It's just horrifying, and it's so infuriating that these sensitivities, this damage that can cause severe symptoms like this, can last for so long after stopping psych meds and then apparently be re-triggered. People online, this is another thing I'm frustrated about. If I come off as like frustrated in this, I apologize. Like I said, I've probably tried to channel oh no. Okay. I was like, I can do this without crying. I probably tried to channel wow. Well, I'm not channeling very well right now, but I've been trying to channel my sadness because I've been so sad into anger because I'm tired of being sad. But this like neurological injury, calling it an addiction, is so stupid. Dad doesn't fall into that category. We've made that clear so many times. He quit smoking and drinking when he was 27. He just isn't that. Instead, he falls into the unfortunately common category of people who were prescribed psych meds long term. And it's not like they were prescribed for no reason. like severe, crippling, life-ruining depression, the kind where you can't get off the couch for 30 years, runs in my family. Okay. It's not the kind of depression you can normally diet and exercise away. Like, people like to say that. They like to look at depressed people and go, why don't you eat better and exercise more? And it's like, I'm in hell. Like, you think that's going to help? Although obviously that was before we knew about only eating meat, which did help. But in a really complicated way. Like, people didn't, who's going to guess that? So it wasn't something you could get rid of from cutting processed foods, for instance. Myself, my dad, my grandpa, my great-grandpa had it. My great-grandpa was left on a doorstep, so I can't imagine he came from a very stable family. Ugh. Okay, I have a Kleenex now. So where was I? Depression. So when Dad started to be badly impacted by depression in the 90s, and he said he had it since he was a kid. He was impacted enough that he was having a hard time lecturing. He took an SSRI. We were told it was a genetic serotonin problem, and antidepressants were basically a vitamin for a serotonin deficiency, which is still what people are told, even though that has been completely debunked. And when I started having symptoms when I was a kid of OCD, suicidal thoughts, extreme anxiety, anger, my psychiatrist, who was assigned to kids with autoimmune disorders, like so many people with autoimmune disorders are on psych meds, put me on Celexa at the time, and that was eventually changed to Lexapro. And they helped a lot initially. I thought they saved my life for years, like a life from hellish depression. And so did Dad. 1 out of 5 or 6, like I said, people in the US is on a psychiatric medication. They're not addicts. They don't even know these medications are dependence forming because their doctors say they're not. And the dangers surrounding these medications certainly aren't well known, even now. That's a large part of the reason for this video. I was like, I don't want to talk about it really, but it's happening and it's so bad that people need to know because it's not rare. And dependence forming, to clarify that, it's different than what people think of when they think of addiction. It means your brain changes to adapt to the medication. So if you pull it out, especially quickly, your brain can't handle it. It's not that you want to take it or enjoy taking it. It could be causing severe side effects. This is what happened with Dad. He started getting akathisia on clonazepam, but pulling it out is impossible and it worsens it. It's a terrible situation. But this was 6 years ago, you know? Anyway, apparently that differentiation between being on a psych med and being an addict is too complicated for most people, or at least for the people complaining on the internet. But I thought it should be addressed anyway. And I'm someone who honestly looks at classic addicts, say heroin, and thinks they must be suffering and it's a complicated issue and I feel bad for them and there's more to it, in my opinion, than someone who just took drugs and is an addict. I think there's likely physiological issues at play for classic addictions. But Dad's not in that category. So now I guess I can talk about what akathisia felt like to me. And when Dad recovers, he can talk about his experience if he wants to. For me, and I don't want to like get into details more than that really, because it's too hard on my family. And I don't want to. So my experience with akathisia, for me, it hit for the first time 2 weeks after I stopped Lexapro in 2015. After going on a ketogenic diet that I kind of randomly went on when I went on an elimination diet that just happened to be ketogenic, I cut out almost everything, like meat and vegetables. And that put my depression into remission. My depression went away. I could feel it go away one day, about 3 months into the diet. And I thought, I'm never going to take another pill again. And I stopped everything. That depression, even on the Lexapro, was so debilitating that when I started doing dietary intervention, testing it out and removing things, I focused on my arthritis, which was crippling. I had joints replaced from it because I thought that was the easier thing to fix, and that there was no way dietary intervention was going to touch something as severe as that depression that runs in my family. That's how you know the Lexapro wasn't fixing the depression, because I felt the depression go away on the ketogenic paleo diet I was on, kind of like meat and vegetables and a bit of fruit, while on Lexapro. So I stopped Lexapro over a 2-week period, which is basically cold turkey, which was crazy after taking it for 11 years. But this was 2015, and even now doctors will wean people down in 2 to 4 weeks. If you have a doctor that suggests you wean down off of a long-term psych med in 2 to 4 weeks, run. That can literally give people neurological injuries. And that's what happened to my family from pulling the medication out too fast. Although we were getting injured on the medication too. People need to hyperbolic taper, and I have links below to it, which is roughly a 10% reduction over every new dose. So if you go from 20 milligrams to 18 milligrams, then the next reduction is smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And sometimes that takes years, and sometimes people still can't do it. So I developed insane sensitivities to food, light, sound, stress, smells, chemicals, vitamins, supplements. My body freaked out. This is why I eventually started only eating meat. That wasn't for fun. It was because I was insane. And getting to the meat diet took me 2 years to figure out. And I suffered quite a bit, even on the paleo and ketogenic diet during that 2.5 year period. So the akathisia and the bad psych med injury symptoms felt like I was overwhelmed with a sense of impending doom that was stronger than anything you can naturally feel. And I know that because, for instance, last summer I was in the hospital with my newborn, and we thought she was going to die. And that was the worst thing I've ever experienced. But the stress response I experienced during antidepressant withdrawal was almost hallucinogenic. It wasn't a natural stress response. That's, I guess, the best way I can describe it. It felt like I was falling into a volcano while being chased by a bear. I had the physical sensation sometimes that I was falling. And there were days when the only thing that felt soothing was wrapping my arms around me. This was more of the akathisia symptoms, and rocking back and forth to try to calm down, or stamping my feet, or shaking my hands. It felt like severe restless legs, but also in my arms and body. Everything I saw was pixelated. I couldn't see color properly. I felt like I was in the upside down in the show Stranger Things. I couldn't listen to music. Music hurt my ears. There were days I couldn't watch TV even. I couldn't lay in bed and watch TV. I just had to lay in a dark room and try to not panic. There wasn't a comfortable position I could get into. Light hurt my eyes, sound hurt my ears. My sense of smell was heightened. I sprouted full-on allergies to things I'd never been allergic to. At the time, I was so unaware that stopping Lexapro could cause these symptoms that I thought it was my autoimmune disorder somehow, or sudden extreme food sensitivities because I had limited my diet to a paleo keto diet, which obviously doesn't make any sense. You don't cut things out and then when you reintroduce them, you hallucinate. That's not a thing that happens. The main thing that flared up my neurological injury were foods and preservatives in foods. And then for Dad, his symptoms, when they got really bad years ago and more recently, were more severe than that. We're not on an all-meat diet for fun. We're on an all-meat diet because we've been left with extremely long-lasting sensitivities and neurological injuries from these medications. And Dad's more sensitive than me, maybe because he was older or on SSRIs longer, and because of the clonazepam for sure. So that's a brief description of my experience with akathisia and psych med withdrawal. It lasted 2.5 years for me, and it only started to go away when I switched from the paleo, dairy-free keto diet to only eating meat. So in the middle of that antidepressant withdrawal years ago now, after a period of not sleeping from a reaction to a preservative called sodium metabisulfite, Dad was prescribed clonazepam. And most of you guys know this. He didn't take it for fun. He took it because he hadn't slept in like 3 weeks. And I know that's true because I had we both ate the same thing that had sodium metabisulfite in it. And I had a similar response, but very horrifying, less severe though, where I threw up and then I didn't sleep well for about 3 weeks. And it was horrible, horrible. He was pale, near anaphylaxis, couldn't really breathe. That was one of those weird allergies that popped up that neither of us had before stopping medication. I didn't have food allergies before stopping those meds. Neither did he. Insomnia so severe you do not sleep can be part of having a psych med-induced neurological injury. Glutamate skyrockets when GABA systems are damaged because GABA is what counteracts glutamate. And we don't really understand a lot of what's happening, but severe insomnia is discussed a lot amongst people with psych med injuries. I had a hard time sleeping for years, even after my antidepressant withdrawal, neurological injury went away with the lion diet. I still have a hard time sleeping. Like that's still my probably most sensitive area, although it's manageable. I'm fine. But I use white noise, a cold room, an eye mask, earplugs. Something's still off. And I'm sure it's from the lingering damage SSRIs did. Dad's doctor prescribing him clonazepam for insomnia due to the undiagnosed SSRI withdrawal, or more aptly described as neurological injury, injured him further. And that's how he ended up with full-blown akathisia for about 2 years after realizing the clonazepam was causing issues after his doctor raised the dose of clonazepam when my mom was diagnosed with cancer and given 8 months to live. All this stuff sounds crazy dramatic, but over the last 6 years, I've talked to hundreds and read thousands of stories of people who experience injuries from psych medications that sound like that. And these aren't out of the ordinary for those people. I wouldn't go into all this detail, except I really do want you guys to understand that as horrible as this is, what's worse is this isn't rare. People who get injured by these don't have a voice, really. They're too sick to have a voice. But I've talked to and been sent stories from thousands of people that are stuck in this hell. SSRI prescriptions and benzodiazepine prescriptions long-term are super common. And the majority of people who take them, especially long-term, have withdrawal or neurological injury from them. It's almost always misdiagnosed as recurrence of their symptoms because doctors will use the same words to describe it. And then these poor people end up on 2 or 3 more medications to stabilize their worsening mental illness when it's really neurological damage from the medications themselves. Most psychiatrists are completely inequipped to handle this. They don't even know about this. They certainly aren't taught about this in medical school. Most people don't know it exists. When it happens in families, like a lot of the time these people are outcast because people can't understand why they're acting the way they're acting. And I'll be the first to say, when I first took a Celexa, it felt like it worked. I felt my shoulders drop. I felt like I could breathe again deeply. I stopped panicking. I stopped having suicidal thoughts and my OCD disappeared. That was when I was 11, but I remember it vividly. And I remember how I felt like before I started taking them. But by the time I was 13, I was certainly still depressed. I stayed on them because I thought, oh my gosh, if this is how I feel with medication, imagine how bad it is without it. But what ended up happening is I got more and more mentally ill over the years, was diagnosed with bipolar type 2, had a seizure from Wellbutrin when that was added in, suffered from severe restless legs that was really intolerable, that I thought was part of having an autoimmune disorder or something. I didn't know it was associated with SSRIs. And I just ended up getting worse and worse and worse. I just always thought I would be even worse without the medications. That wasn't true. What I needed to focus on was mitochondrial health, really. So I'm going to get into that now. Mitochondrial dysfunction is like ketogenic research. In 5 years, it's going to be mainstream. Like ketogenic therapies are moving into the mainstream, thank goodness. There's mounting evidence that dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, long COVID, and those weird chronic diseases that people get that are hard to treat and kind of fringe, but most definitely exist, like chronic fatigue, Lyme, POTS, MCAS, like those kind of things. that have this large array of seemingly unrelated symptoms that include things like chronic fatigue, depression, brain fog, anxiety, chronic pain, lightheadedness, weird chemical and food sensitivities, are due to mitochondrial dysfunction, because that impacts your whole body and your brain. 10% of us by weight are mitochondria. So when I talk about neurological injuries, what I'm talking about is mitochondrial dysfunction that manifests like a neurological injury. This is pretty cutting edge research, and I've linked papers below so people can read more about it. In the previous kind of announcement videos, I talked about how whatever was going on with Dad had been diagnosed as SIRS. That's still true. He definitely has SIRS. Otherwise, the mold exposures he experienced wouldn't have caused neurological symptoms. That's chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and it's almost like mold-induced illness. I think that the genetic predisposition to mold illness is likely what caused the severe mental illness that ran in my family that was then treated with medication. I talked about how it felt spiritual, and it does. It's been hellish. I know, like, other people going through really stressful periods with sick families, like, know what those periods of time are like, and like, it's hellish. My daughter last summer was hospitalized the same day as my dad. That seems odd. There's a biological basis for what's going on with Dad, and we finally know what it is, but I do think there was a spiritual element, or is. I'd also say if mentally ill, desperate people are given medication that's supposed to ease their suffering that ends up nearly killing them when they stop, or even while they're on it, and then they can't stop, I would say that's evil. Have you guys heard of post-SSRI sexual dysfunction? It's way more common than people realize too. And podcasters are starting to talk about it, which is good, but it causes seemingly permanent genital numbness and anhedonia, so emotional numbness. It makes people suicidal because they can't feel anything. And that can happen from short-term use to some people of these medications. Finasteride one of them, SSRIs, any medication that can cause things like that, akathisia, PSSD, that level of suffering is evil, I think. I do think our family has been attacked spiritually because I cannot understand the level of suffering that I've been through, let alone my dad's been through, and my whole family, without it making more sense through a spiritual lens. Oh, thank God I'm a Christian. Anyway, away from the spiritual part. So the association between SIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or basically mold-induced illness, ketogenic diets, like the carnivore diet, and psych med-induced neurological injury. How do they connect together? Mitochondria. Mold causes mitochondria to hibernate to protect themselves and shut down, which causes this weird array of symptoms I talked about. Psych meds cause mitochondrial dysfunction. I've linked the papers that manifest as a neurological injury. And a ketogenic diet gives mitochondria an alternate fuel that helps them heal and helps them work, which is why it's so massively useful and why we're just eating meat. I'm going to put this video out and people are going to tell me I'm reaching, but this is now well-established research. Mitochondrial dysfunction research is blowing up right now. I'm going to talk about it more on my podcast because it's promising. It's really promising, and understanding what's wrong is really the only way to figure out health problems. Like I said, there are papers linked below, so you don't have to just take my word for it. And I would have made this video shorter, but I wanted to address everything I could. In a fit of frustration and anger at this situation and how unfair it is, I put a website together that I linked below called prescribed-harm.com, which goes into the research about psychiatric medications and what they're doing to people. And if you're watching this video and have been injured by these medications, you can write your story on that website too, and I'll post it. Or maybe that website will be useful to explain to family members what's going on, or doctors who don't usually know what's going on, or leave a comment below to show people this isn't uncommon. These injured people are so hurt, like I said, that they can't usually have their story told because they're just trying to survive. And they're basically disabled and traumatized and gaslit and misdiagnosed. I'm going to be jumping up and down for a while, probably until this is dealt with properly, about the dangers these medications produce, until things are changed, or at least until it's common knowledge that people need to be aware of this before they start the medication. Pharmaceutical companies rename these neurological injuries and psych med side effects and use language to hide the symptoms. Like there's malevolence here too. Like calling akathisia restlessness may cause restlessness. Calling akathisia restlessness makes me want to hurt people. And maybe that's pregnancy hormones talking, but it's criminal, really. There are no long-term studies on these medications, yet most people take them for more than 5 years and are told that they're safe, or at least safer than their original mental issue. Actually, there's one long-term study, and you know what it shows? That 60% of people have a recurrence of symptoms. That's what they got from the study, and need to go back on the medication. You know what's stupid about that? They don't differentiate between recurrence and withdrawal. And withdrawal is almost always misdiagnosed as recurrence, even though the array of symptoms with withdrawal is generally way more severe and includes pain syndromes and sensitivities and new symptoms. They're just like, well, you just got worse. Nope. The industry is so crooked. It's a travesty that now that there's actual solid research linking ketogenic diets to improving mental disorders, treating them, giving the brain the energy that it needs to not be sick. I linked metabolicminds.com below, which is a great site about ketogenic diets and mental illnesses, run by scientists. And that diet, or the carnivore diet, should be first-line treatment for mental illness, given they will work and actually treat the energy deficiency that's causing mental illness, but especially because these psych medications cause mitochondrial dysfunction long-term that manifests as a neurological injury and is very difficult, if not impossible, to treat without time and lifestyle interventions like ketogenic diet, sun, sleep, no stress, like serious stress regulation. So to end this rant, and apologies, I can see it's been 33 minutes, but I really did want to cover everything because it's a lot. So prayers are much appreciated still. And all this suffering, we hope, leads to more awareness so other people can avoid this. Withdrawal is a silly name for what happens to people, because withdrawal should be solved by the original medication, right? If you're in withdrawal, you go back on the original medication, you're not in withdrawal anymore, all your symptoms go away. That's not what happens here. This is a neurological injury. I don't want to promise another update. I'm grumpy and pregnant, and I don't want to be on the hook publicly for another update. I don't want to talk about it. I'm going to talk about mitochondrial dysfunction and psych med, this travesty of psych med injuries. But I've been barely surviving with the pregnancy hormones and stress. Thank goodness for my husband, who's just a rock, but I'm not sleeping well. I wasn't eating well. At least this week, it appears I'm not crying constantly. Being in the second trimester probably helps that. But that's it for updates about Dad until he's back. Now that we know it's a neurological injury and we know we need time for him to recover, and we can speed it up by not provoking a reaction. Like I said, prayers are much appreciated for my dad and for my brother, my mom, and me, and all the people helping us to help him through this. So there's light at the end of the tunnel, but people need to know these medications and what they can do to people, especially long-term, but not just long-term. And they need to be aware of these before taking a medication. So check out everything I've linked below if you want. I spent a decent amount of time trying to find good articles. And my recent study that I posted that's being done on the carnivore versus keto versus standard American diet and rheumatoid arthritis and IBD, run by a research team, is linked below, and prescribe-harm.com for more information on how to safely taper to avoid neurological injury and to read other people's experiences. So thank you guys for listening, and thank you for the support. And I'm really sorry for anyone else damaged by these horrible medications, but there's hope. You can recover with time. Ketogenic diets are unbelievably helpful, and it's about avoiding making it worse, because bodies and brains do want to recover. So thanks for listening, and I'll see some of you on my podcast.
I don't think I had any happiness at all for 3 years, pretty much.
And what
It
is...
was dire. Well, my wife, she spent a year hovering on the brink of death in a variety of different ways. Before that, my daughter had catastrophic health problems, which have mostly resolved. And then I got extremely ill, so we've been in, and at the same time, we were facing social pressure of like an unparalleled magnitude, people trying to, you know, bring this enterprise to a halt, I suppose, if that's probably the right way to think about it. Most of that time, I was hoping that I would die. I've been grateful for the good things that have happened to me, but I don't think I was grateful enough before just for mundane normality, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, you think you don't have everything you could have, and perhaps that's true, but if you can sit down and breathe, there's lots of people who don't have that.
Yeah.